Hello, listeners of the latest episode. Welcome to the new chapter of our story.
John Martinez and Sarah Anderson reached Fort Carson's perimeter at 0200 hours, 36 hours after the demonstration massacre, 12 hours before Phase 2 regional implementation. The facility was on maximum alert, extra patrols, surveillance systems running continuously, guards positioned at every access point. Webb knew the resistance would respond to 94 executions. He was waiting for retaliation, but he was expecting an assault, an attack on his forces, revenge for the massacre. He wasn't expecting infiltration, 2 people trying to reach medical detention 3 levels underground, trying to access 62 transformed prisoners, trying to extract blood samples from 2 specific individuals who'd been transformed with high cognitive retention. Sarah carried the extraction equipment Morrison had prepared. Syringes, vials, everything needed to draw blood from Jennifer and Marcus without harming them. John carried weapons and the facility layout from Rachel's intelligence, updated with Jennifer's memories of Fort Carson from her time as Hunter 9. They bypassed the primary entrance, used a maintenance access tunnel that Rachel's data showed, but Webb's current security might have overlooked. The tunnel was cramped, dark, risky, but it led directly to the lower levels where medical detention was located. Once we're inside, we have maybe 30 minutes before security realizes we're not supposed to be there. John whispered. Find Jennifer and Marcus, extract samples, exfiltrate before the entire facility comes down on us. And if we can't find them in 30 minutes? Sarah asked. Then we don't make it out, John said simply. They entered Fort Carson through the maintenance tunnel, emerged in a service corridor on level 2. Medical detention was 1 level down, 62 cells holding 62 transformed prisoners undergoing reconditioning. The reconditioning was Webb's attempt to fix the incomplete transformations. The 62 people who'd transformed with 70 to 80% cognitive retention. Too much consciousness, too much resistance. Webb was trying to reduce their retention down to his target 40%, trying to make them forget they'd been human enough to remember being human. John and Sarah descended to level 3. The detention wing was secured, but not as heavily as John had feared. Webb's forces were focused on external threats. Interior security was lighter, relying on the fact that transformed prisoners couldn't escape even if they wanted to. Their enhanced physiology was controlled by conditioning they couldn't fully overcome. 62 cells, Sarah said, studying the corridor. We need to identify Jennifer and Marcus quickly. Morrison said their blood specifically because their antibodies are from successful reversal. Other transformed prisoners won't have the right antibody profile. They moved through the detention wing systematically. Each cell held a transformed prisoner. Some showed the blank compliance Webb wanted. Others fought against restraints, screamed, exhibited the consciousness that made them dangerous to Webb's vision. Cell 8 contained Jennifer Park. John saw her through the observation window, saw the enhanced physiology, the modified features that marked transformation, but also saw her eyes, aware, conscious, tracking movement with intelligence that shouldn't exist in someone Webb had been reconditioning for 36 hours. Sarah opened the cell door carefully. Jennifer's head snapped toward them. Recognition flickered across her face, then confusion, then something that looked like hope, crushed immediately by despair. Jennifer, Sarah said quietly, we're here to help. We need blood samples. Morrison can use your antibodies to produce more inoculation. Protect thousands of people. Can you stay still while I extract? Jennifer's face contorted, not from pain but from internal war. Webb's conditioning was programmed into her transformed biology, commands embedded in neural pathways. One of those commands would be, "Alert guards to unauthorized personnel." John could see her fighting it. 80% of Jennifer was still human, still conscious, still capable of choosing. 20% was Webb's conditioning, programming that tried to override her will. She didn't call out, didn't alert anyone. Her jaw clenched so hard, John thought she might break teeth. But she stayed silent while her entire transformed physiology screamed to follow Webb's commands. Sarah moved quickly, drew blood from Jennifer's arm, filled 3 vials with samples, enough for Morrison to synthesize thousands of doses. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Jennifer's eyes focused on Sarah with desperate intensity. Her mouth moved, words forced through conditioning that wanted to stop her. Make it matter. The same words she'd transmitted during the demonstration. The last thing she'd said before they escaped Fort Carson the first time. A reminder that 94 people had died, proving transformation could be resisted, that she and Marcus had sacrificed their humanity again to give Morrison the antibodies that made protection possible. "We will," John promised. They left Jennifer's cell. She didn't resist, didn't call for guards, even though Webb's programming must have been demanding it. 80% consciousness meant 80% of Jennifer was still capable of making choices, and she chose to let them take what they needed, chose mission over conditioning, chose to make her suffering mean something. Cell 12 held Marcus Webb, Jr. He showed the same pattern as Jennifer, enhanced physiology, conscious eyes, internal struggle between humanity and conditioning. When Sarah entered to draw blood, Marcus didn't resist, didn't alert guards, let them take 3 vials while his transformed body fought against his human will. "Rachel would be proud," Marcus said, words forced through programming. 94 made them count. He was talking about the demonstration, about the 94 who'd been executed, about making sure their deaths accomplished something, about understanding that he and Jennifer were prisoners, but their blood could save thousands. "It counts," John said. "All of it. Everyone we've lost, everyone who sacrificed. It counts." They had the samples. 6 vials total. 3 from Jennifer, 3 from Marcus. Enough for Morrison to produce thousands of doses of inoculation, enough to protect entire settlements from Webb's forced transformation. But as they left Marcus's cell, alarms sounded throughout Fort Carson. Webb's security had detected the infiltration, either through surveillance John and Sarah had missed, or through systematic cell checks, or through simple bad luck. The facility erupted into lockdown, soldiers mobilizing, exits sealing, every guard converging on Level 3 medical detention. "Go," Jennifer's voice carried from Cell 8. "Get out. Make it matter." John and Sarah ran. 6 vials of blood samples that represented humanity's last hope. Webb soldiers behind them. 62 transformed prisoners conscious enough to watch 2 resistance fighters flee with the key to stopping Phase 2. They fought through guards at the stairwell. Sarah took a bullet to her shoulder but kept moving. John provided covering fire, burning through ammunition, buying seconds they needed to reach the maintenance tunnel. The extraction was chaos, running through cramped tunnels. Webb's forces realizing where they'd gone, pursuing. But the tunnels were narrow, defensible. 2 people with desperation could hold off 20 with superior numbers. They reached the perimeter, breached through a service gate, made it into the ruins outside Fort Carson, with alarms screaming behind them and soldiers flooding out to pursue. But they had the samples, had what Morrison needed, had paid for it With Sarah's wound and Jennifer's suffering, and Marcus's conscious imprisonment, and the knowledge that they'd left 62 people behind who were aware enough to know they'd been abandoned, the extraction team reached the resistance base at 0600 hours. 4 hours after infiltration, 6 hours before Phase 2 regional implementation. Morrison took the samples immediately. I can start synthesis within the hour. First batch of inoculation in 24 hours. Estimate 10,000 doses producible with these antibody levels. 10,000 doses. Enough to protect 10,000 people. Enough to offer real choice to settlements facing Webb's forced transformation. Enough to make 94 deaths mean something more than martyrdom. But Webb wasn't waiting 24 hours. The broadcast came at 0800 hours. Webb's voice on every frequency. Phase 2, regional implementation begins immediately. Fort Carson was infiltrated last night by resistance operatives. They extracted biological materials from transformed subjects. This confirms the resistance possesses technology to interfere with transformation protocols. All settlements have 12 hours to accept voluntary infection or be classified as hostile. Hostile settlements will be treated as contaminated zones. No negotiation, no exceptions. He'd accelerated the timeline, moved Phase 2 forward from 12 hours to immediate implementation, because he knew the resistance had samples, knew Morrison could produce inoculation, knew that every hour of delay gave more settlements time to be protected. We can't produce 10,000 doses in 12 hours, Morrison said. We need 24 hours minimum. Webb's forcing the issue before we can distribute protection. Then we protect who we can and warn the others, John said. Broadcast Morrison's discovery. Tell settlements that inoculation exists, that the 94 who resisted at the demonstration had protection we can replicate. Give them hope, even if we can't give them doses yet. The resistance broadcast on every frequency they could access. This is the resistance. The 94 people executed at Fort Carson demonstrated that transformation can be prevented. We have developed an inoculation that blocks Webb's modified infection, 60% effective. We are producing doses as fast as possible. Any settlement that can delay Webb's forced infection for 24 hours will receive protection. Resist. Survive. Wait for us. Some settlements heard the message and prepared to resist. Fortified positions. Refused Webb's forces entry. Bought time for inoculation that might never arrive. Others were too close to Webb's facilities. Too accessible, too vulnerable. Webb soldiers reached them within hours, forced infection of entire populations, created controlled settlements before the resistance could intervene, and some settlements volunteered for infection, chose transformation over resistance. Decided Webb's promises of safety were better than the resistance's promises of protection that might not materialize in time. The region fractured, 3 groups forming, protected settlements that held out long enough to receive inoculation, transformed settlements under Webb's control, dead settlements that resisted without protection and paid the price. Morrison's first batch completed at 0600 hours the next morning. 1,000 doses, a tenth of what he could eventually produce, but enough to start protecting settlements. The resistance divided into distribution teams, racing against Webb's forces, reaching settlements before forced infection, administering inoculation, teaching them how to resist, giving them the protection 94 people had died proving was possible. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Morrison produced doses. Resistance distributed them. Some settlements were protected, some were transformed, some were destroyed. John led distribution teams, saw settlements survive because inoculation reached them in time, saw others transform because the resistance arrived 12 hours too late, saw the brutal math playing out. Save these people, lose those people, never enough resources to save everyone. Sarah recovered from her shoulder wound, returned to the field despite Morrison's protests, said Jennifer and Marcus had suffered transformation twice, and she could handle a bullet wound, led her own distribution team, protected settlements in the northern region while John covered the south. And in Fort Carson's medical detention, Jennifer and Marcus remained prisoners, conscious enough to know the resistance was using their antibodies to save thousands, unable to be rescued because every available fighter was focused on distribution, sacrificed for the mission, again. 6 months after the demonstration, the region had stabilized into an uneasy equilibrium. Webb controlled approximately 40% of survivor settlements, transformed populations with 40 to 60% cognitive retention, controlled workforce, obedient, productive, everything he'd envisioned for Phase 2. His facilities operated at full capacity. His personnel numbered 2,797. He'd achieved partial success. Protected settlements accounted for 30%. Populations inoculated before Webb could force transformation, free, fully human, resistant to modified infection. They'd formed a loose alliance with the resistance, shared resources, coordinated defense, built something that looked like the beginning of civilization rather than the end. The remaining 30% were dead settlements, places that had resisted without protection, places Webb's forces had destroyed rather than transformed, places that had fought back and lost, graveyards marking the cost of freedom without the tools to defend it. The resistance survived. 42 fighters had become 60, as protected settlements contributed people willing to fight. Morrison's laboratory produced 200 doses of inoculation per week. Chen coordinated alliance logistics. Michael trained new fighters. Sarah led field operations. And John broadcast. Every night at midnight, John transmitted on frequency 107.3. The same frequency he'd used during the network war. The same frequency Rachel had listened to. The same frequency that had become synonymous with resistance. This is the last broadcast. To all survivors in the region, transformation can be resisted. Protection exists. The 94 people executed at Fort Carson proved humanity doesn't have to surrender. Their sacrifice made inoculation possible. Morrison's compound has protected thousands, will protect thousands more. Stay human, stay free. The fight continues. Some nights he talked about Rachel, about her choice to extract intelligence that made everything else possible, about 17 people who died in the triple strike, about 20 hostages executed because the resistance could only save 27, about 94 who proved transformation could be prevented and paid with their lives. Other nights he talked about Jennifer and Marcus, about how they were prisoners in Fort Carson, conscious enough to know what was happening, unable to be rescued because every resource was devoted to protecting settlements, about how their blood had saved thousands, but they remained unsaved. "We haven't forgotten," John said during one broadcast. "Jennifer Marcus, if you can hear this, if Webb lets you listen, we haven't forgotten. Every dose we produce comes from your sacrifice. Every settlement we protect exists because you let us take what we needed. You're not abandoned. You're the foundation everything else is built on." He didn't know if they could hear, didn't know if Webb allowed transformed prisoners access to broadcasts, but he said it anyway, because some promises needed to be spoken even if no one was listening. The war continued. Not the final battle John had imagined, not the climactic assault on Cheyenne Mountain to eliminate Colonel Mitchell, not the dramatic defeat of Webb and total liberation of the region. Just continuation, distribution teams protecting settlements, Webb's forces transforming populations, alliance expanding, controlled zones consolidating, two visions of humanity's future competing for territory and resources and the souls of people who just wanted to survive. Morrison's laboratory became the center of the resistance. Every week, 200 more doses. Every month, 800 people protected. In 6 months, Morrison produced 4,800 doses, protected 4,800 people, created 4,800 living examples that transformation could be prevented. But he couldn't save Jennifer and Marcus, couldn't reverse a second transformation, couldn't reach them in Fort Carson where Webb kept them under heavy guard. Their antibodies saved thousands, but they remained unsaved, conscious prisoners who'd sacrificed their humanity twice and gotten nothing in return except the knowledge that their suffering had meaning. The alliance grew, protected settlements forming councils, establishing trade networks, building defenses, creating something that looked like government rather than just survival groups. They called it the Free Settlements Alliance. 43 communities, 18,000 people. Proof that Webb's vision of controlled transformation wasn't the only path forward. Webb adapted too. Increased security at his facilities, fortified controlled settlements, established production pipelines for modified infection. His 40% of the region wasn't total control, but it was stable control, sustainable. He'd lost the battle for universal transformation, but won the war for partial implementation. The region existed in 3 pieces: Webb's controlled zones, the Free Settlements Alliance, and the dead zones between them where neither side operated, ruins haunted by uncontrolled, infected, abandoned settlements, graveyards marking the cost of the war. It wasn't the ending John had wanted, wasn't the complete victory where Webb was defeated and everyone was saved and humanity rebuilt civilization without compromise. It was the ending they'd earned. Incomplete, difficult, real. Some people were saved, some were transformed, some died. The resistance survived but didn't triumph. Webb remained powerful but didn't achieve total control. Jennifer and Marcus were never rescued, but their sacrifice protected thousands. 1 year after the demonstration, John visited Rachel's grave. They'd returned to the original base eventually, the place they'd abandoned during the systematic campaign, the hill where Rachel was buried alongside the 17 from the triple strike and the 4 hunters they couldn't save. The graves were overgrown. No one had maintained them during the year of war, but the markers remained, Rachel's name carved into wood. She was brave, written beneath it. John stood there for a long time, thinking about impossible choices, about brutal mathematics, about everyone they'd lost and everyone they'd saved, and everyone who remained in between. "We did it," John said quietly. "Not the way you would have wanted, not complete, but we did it. Your intelligence showed us Webb's network. Morrison's inoculation came from the antibodies Marcus and Jennifer developed when we reversed their first transformation. The 94 who died at the demonstration proved protection was possible. All of it built on what you started. He thought about the broadcast he'd make tonight, about the settlements waiting to hear that resistance continued, about the people who needed to know that staying human was still possible. 18,000 people are free because of what you gave us. John continued. That's not everyone. That's not victory. But it's something. It's what we could do with what you left us. The wind carried sounds from the resistance base below. People working, training, living. Proof that everything they'd sacrificed had meaning. Incomplete meaning. Imperfect meaning. But meaning nonetheless. John returned to the base, prepared for that night's broadcast, the last broadcast that had become a nightly ritual, a reminder that humanity survived, that transformation could be resisted, that the fight continued. At midnight, he keyed the transmitter. This is the last broadcast. To all survivors in the region, another week completed. Another 200 doses produced. Another settlement protected. The alliance grows. Webb's control remains but doesn't expand. The dead zones stay dead. We survive. To the 94 who died at Fort Carson, your sacrifice protected 18,000 people. Your deaths proved transformation could be resisted. Every dose we produce exists because you stayed human when Webb infected you. You're not forgotten. To Jennifer Park and Marcus Webb, Jr., prisoners in Fort Carson, we're still fighting, still protecting people with inoculation synthesized from your blood, still working toward the day we can bring you home. You're not forgotten. To Rachel Martinez, who started all of this, your intelligence made everything possible, the network you died exposing, the facilities you helped us find, the path forward you showed us even when it cost your life. You're not forgotten. This is the last broadcast, broadcasting every night at midnight on 107.3, reminding everyone that humanity survives, that transformation can be resisted, that the fight continues. Stay human, stay free. We'll broadcast again tomorrow. John ended the transmission, sat in silence for a moment, thought about everyone they'd lost, everyone they'd saved, everyone still fighting. The war wasn't over, might never be over. Webb remained powerful. Controlled settlements existed. Phase 2 had partially succeeded. Jennifer and Marcus were still prisoners. The region remained fractured, but humanity survived, protected, resistant, free. It wasn't victory, it was continuation, and sometimes continuation was the only victory available. Sometimes surviving was enough. Sometimes incomplete success was better than perfect failure. The broadcast would continue tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night as long as the resistance existed, as long as settlements needed to know that staying human was possible, as long as people needed reminding that the fight continued, because that was the real lesson. Not that they'd won or lost, but that they kept fighting, kept resisting, kept choosing humanity over control, over and over, every day, without end. The last broadcast would continue, and as long as it did, Webb hadn't won, the resistance hadn't lost, and humanity, imperfect, fractured, incomplete, survived. That was enough. It had to be enough, because there was nothing else. The end. Epilogue. 2 years later. The broadcasts continued. 1,460 nightly transmissions, never missing a night, always on 107.3, always reminding people that resistance was possible. Morrison's laboratory had produced 20,800 doses of inoculation, protected 20,800 people. The Free Settlements Alliance had grown to 62 communities, 24,000 people, 38% of the region's surviving population. Webb's controlled zones held steady at 40%. The dead zones remained at 22%, graveyards and ruins that neither side controlled. And in Fort Carson's medical detention, Jennifer Park and Marcus Webb Jr. remained prisoners. 2 years transformed, 2 years conscious, 2 years knowing their blood protected thousands while they remained unsaved. But the resistance hadn't forgotten, hadn't stopped planning, hadn't abandoned them. On the 730th broadcast, 2 years after the demonstration, John deviated from his standard transmission. "This is the last broadcast. Tonight's message is for Jennifer Park and Marcus Webb Jr., prisoners in Fort Carson for 730 days. We're coming, not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. We've spent 2 years building alliances, training fighters, producing inoculation, growing strong enough to do what we couldn't do before. Fort Carson will be our next major operation, not for revenge, not for strategy, but for you. Because you've been prisoners long enough, because your sacrifice has protected 24,000 people, and you deserve to be among them. Stay alive, stay conscious, stay human. We're coming." John ended the broadcast, looked at the operation plans Chen and Michael had been developing, the Alliance's combined forces, protected settlements, contributing fighters, a coordinated assault on Fort Carson, not to destroy it, but to extract 2 people who'd sacrificed everything and gotten nothing in return. It would be dangerous, would cost lives, might fail completely. But some missions were worth attempting, even if success seemed impossible. Some people were worth saving, even if the price was high. Jennifer and Marcus had been prisoners for 2 years. They would be prisoners no longer, one way or another. The last broadcast would continue. The fight would continue. And eventually, impossibly, 2 transformed prisoners would come home. Because that was what resistance meant. Not winning perfectly, but never surrendering, never accepting that some people were beyond saving, never stopping the fight. The broadcast ended. The planning began. And in Fort Carson, if Jennifer and Marcus could still hear, they knew rescue was coming. Maybe not tonight, maybe not soon, but coming. The story didn't end with victory or defeat. It ended with continuation, with fighting, with the understanding that humanity survived not through triumph, but through refusal to quit. The last broadcast, broadcasting every night, reminding everyone. The fight continues, always, forever, without end.